you can't understand money until you understand Bitcoin, and it really does invite you to reconstruct all that you know and rethink all of the things you thought, because Bitcoin is the first perfected money in the history of the human race. Terra, Luna, FTT, a lot of smart guys wanted to trade altcoins. You know, they made some money for a time, but they're juggling razor blades.
When you talk about the engineering of Bitcoin, do you think Bitcoin was invented or it was discovered?
I think both. I think that the system, the engineering system of a digital commodity that is stabilizing, right, and viral, and cybernetic, I think that was invented. I think the fact that it was capped at 21 million, like you could have created a digital commodity that inflates the amount by 5% a year. Or created a Dogecoin or something, you know, that's like something similar, but it's inflationary.
And this could have been like the first Bitcoin as well. Like there could be like Dogecoin as the first cryptocurrency.
And you could have created 100 of those.
Yeah.
And you know, there are forks of Bitcoin, right? But you could have created all sorts of defective ones, like ones that didn't get the issuance schedule right. And commodities aren't that interesting. Like silver's a commodity, soybeans a commodity. They're not good investments, right? So the invention part was they invented a decentralized digital commodity network without an issuer. The discovery part was making it absolutely scarce and having it circulate for a year and a half before Pizza Day, such that it had no monetary value and it's spontaneously monetized. So the spontaneous, immaculate conception of a scarcity network for the first time in the history of the human race, that was the discovery. You can never do that again. Right, you can never do that one again. Yeah. But
that's why we are so lucky that like the first cryptocurrency was a success, right? Because if we had like a Dogecoin as the first cryptocurrency and Bitcoin would be like the second, like people would maybe like invest at the first day like so much money and it wouldn't work out that way.
Or maybe, you know, you could argue that if you know, fake Toshi had created a Doge network that was 5% inflationary with all the other attributes of Bitcoin, it would have sputtered, but eventually it would have died, because 5% inflationary means every 14 years the value of your money is cut in half. And over the course of 100 years it gets cut in half like 7 times. And so that's like creating a ship with a hole in it, or creating a ship made of wood. A wooden ship hull will, you know, over 100 years will rot. You could have created it. You could have said, I invented shipping, but Satoshi comes along and says, I'm going to make it steel. It is zero inflationary. It's asymptotically going to zero, which means there's 21 million. Well, if it's zero inflationary, the half-life of the money isn't 14 years. The half-life of the money is 1 billion years. It's forever, infinity. There's a big difference between infinity and 14 years, right? 5% gets you, you live 14 years. And infinity means you live forever. So, if you're an ocean engineer, and you designed the first wooden ship, and I designed a steel ship, you probably would have gone back and forth 1 or 2 voyages. The worms would have eaten your ship, it would have sunk. Mine would be still going. And every objective observer would, you know, every shipper, they'd be like, you got to be an idiot. I'm not going to build wooden ships. I don't make any money. The ships sink after 2 voyages. So all the cargo would go in the steel ship. We still would have discovered it. Right? I mean, arguably, everything that came before Bitcoin was an attempt that was defective in some way. There's a lot of stuff that came after Bitcoin that's defective, that's not dead yet. but most of it's almost dead, right? I mean, like it's collapsing at a pretty rapid rate. How long have the Bitcoin forks lasted, right? The block size wars were 2018, right? 2017. So we're 5 years later, so they're not going to last 10 years. I mean, many of them didn't last 5 years. So back to the question, right? Bitcoin was both invented and discovered. It was invented by some brilliant engineers. You know,
multiple engineers.
Sorry?
You think? Multiple engineers, you think?
Well, I mean, they all contributed, right? David Chaum, right? Public-private key cryptography, you know, Merkle trees, proof of work from Adam Back, right? You know, Hal Finney made a bunch of contributions. So I think a bunch of engineers contributed, and not just cryptographers, right? The difficulty adjustment is a first-order negative feedback loop. First-order negative feedback loops pop up in every control mechanism. There's an entire field of control theory and electrical engineering and all engineering, right? So these ideas of servo mechanisms on cyber controls, they go back 100 years, right? The stuff in Bitcoin came out of electrical engineering, computer engineering, cryptography, aeronautical engineering, systems engineering. And eventually Satoshi put it all together. But that's what engineers do, right? I mean, if you want to look to the brilliant mathematician, go back to Isaac Newton, right? I mean, Isaac Newton wrote a book, Principia Mathematica, that laid the foundations for 90% of everything. And then you have guys like Maxwell, you know, Maxwell's equation. You have a few really great scientists, some great mathematicians, but then the engineers put it all into a cybernetic format, and Satoshi put it all together, released it, and ultimately Bitcoin was the first invented digital commodity network, but it was also the discovery of absolute scarcity for the first time in the history of the human race. And of the two, absolute scarcity is probably much more profound. There's only one. But you can create other digital commodity networks. I could fork Bitcoin, and I could, if I'm China, I could fork it, call it China Coin, and I could say you don't get taxed on it in China, and it's legal to mine it. It's something. I could actually make it inflationary and make it defective. It still might be a digital commodity that'll last for 30 years. I don't think it'll last for 30,000 years. Right? China Coin might last as long as China lasts. And it would still be a digital commodity, but it's not scarcity. Bitcoin will outlast every country. It may outlast humans on this earth. Right? I mean, Bitcoin could last 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 years, right? It is an invention along with fire, you know, along with the number 0 or math. But the other stuff is engineering, and the truth is we needed to engineer the network, and Satoshi gets credit for that. And I guess we all get credit for discovering or for appreciating the discovery of absolute scarcity if we think deep enough about it.
Thank you, Satoshi. I really enjoy listening to you, and I was like wondering, how do you soak up all this information? Like, how do you cultivate like all these ideas? Is your favorite like more books, or is it podcasts or blogs or articles or maybe even conversations?
Well, I read and have read a ton of books in my life. I lived, right? I was public company CEO, and I'm still public company officer since 1989, and 1998 we came public, so I have all that experience running a software company. I listen to a lot of books, like I listened to Murray Rothbard's History of Economic Thought from an Austrian perspective, very long book on the history of all economic thought. Right now I'm reading Rothbard's Conceived in Liberty. which is the history of the American economic experiment before the Revolutionary War and all the colonies and all of their economic behavior for hundreds of years. I do a lot of reading of, economics, politics, the history of the world, all the political histories, and then of course I listen to all the podcasts I can. I try to speed listen to Bitcoin podcasts, especially the technical ones by the engineers that know more than me, or the OGs that have been around before me, and then try to read and listen to all of the content by all the regulators in the world, all the lawsuits, all the legislation, all the testimony, right? And so it's kind of a full-time job, just trying to absorb what everybody is saying, and then simultaneously going back. One of the things about Bitcoin which is fascinating is once you can't understand money until you understand Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is the first perfected money in the history of the human race. And you can't understand economics until you understand Bitcoin, because if you never saw thermodynamically sound money, you never saw thermodynamically sound or physically sound economics. And the Austrian economists came closest to that, but they didn't have mathematically perfect assets, and they didn't have an economic system to implement a perfect, mathematically correct ledger. So you have to rethink accounting, rethink economics, rethink money, rethink finance, and therefore rethink political history after you get orange pilled. So that means that I find myself going back and rereading all the histories and reconsidering everything I learned before Bitcoin. And when you start listening and reading the history after Bitcoin, you start saying, okay, who printed the money? Where did the money go? What was the cause of that war? Who financed that war? What was the result of that war? And what you do is you reinterpret all of European history, all of Roman history, all of Western history, all of American history, all politics. And of course, the good guys become the bad guys. Sometimes the bad guys become the good guys. You realize that a lot of the good guys were the ones that were stepped on, but then occasionally they crawled out from that muck, and words that you ignored in your youth, words and statements and actions and battles that didn't have any gravitas when you were in high school and college or in your 20s, all of a sudden you interpret them differently, and you realize the thing you didn't pay attention to was the important fight, and the thing that you paid attention to was utterly unimportant and irrelevant. And so I feel like Bitcoin is a way to keep your view of the world fresh and vital, and it really does invite you to reconstruct all that you know and rethink all of the things you thought.
I think my last question would be, what would you do as a young guy who is interested in Bitcoin? What would like a young Michael Saylor do? Like, what business would he start? What would be like the first steps to move forward?
If you're interested in, are you asking what should you do to understand and appreciate the Bitcoin opportunities, or are you asking what should you do with your time outside of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think what should you do if you're already interested in Bitcoin, if you see like the opportunity and power of Bitcoin, what would be the next steps?
Well, I guess I would say think about the world in two hemispheres. There's the P&L, how will you work? And then there's the balance sheet. How will you store the fruit of your labor? Okay, so you can understand Bitcoin, and to understand Bitcoin, you have to understand Bitcoin, study it, study the history of science, study the history of economics, especially Austrian economics and the like, and study the way the layer 1 protocol works with layer 2, layer 3, etc. So that's the Bitcoin stack. Then there's the question of what will you do with your life? And that's everything else, okay? And so, for example, AI is going to change the way people do things. If you're an artist today, I would say, well, 10 years ago, study Photoshop. You know, if you have a choice between being an artist, you know, painting on the street and selling your paintings, or being a digital artist in Photoshop, you want to do Photoshop. But today I would say study AI plus Photoshop, and then start thinking about, you know, how you create the most value from your talent, harnessing the most advanced tools, right? And whatever money you make, invest it in Bitcoin.
Yeah, definitely.
You see, like, all of the industries today are being attacked by technology. Like, some of them more so than others. If they ever make a car that drives and you're a driver, then you've got a problem. If you're a cook and the robot cooks, you have a problem. If you're an artist, though, and the AI makes art, you have a problem. So someplace, if you're a doctor and you give a diagnosis and the AI gives a better diagnosis and there's 100 million AI doctors, you have a problem. So, or you have an opportunity. So in this part of your profession, you just have to figure out how will technology impact what you're doing, and you should adjust. And Bitcoin may offer an opportunity, may not. But 98% of the world doesn't need to contemplate Bitcoin. They need to be a good doctor, a good driver, a good pilot, or a good engineer, right? And so figure that out. What Bitcoin offers you is the ability to work at another profession, save your money in Bitcoin, and have your net worth go up exponentially over the course of your life. So a lot of people make the mistake of, like, so let's say you're a brain surgeon. They could make $500,000 a year as a brain surgeon, and they make the mistake of thinking I should quit being a brain surgeon and create my own altcoin or trade altcoins because that's the Bitcoin thing to do. Well, no, you're the world's best brain surgeon. People need you, and they'll pay you $500,000 a year. If you took the $500,000 a year and you bought Bitcoin 10 years in a row, you would be a billionaire by now, and still a brain surgeon, right? If you'd done it that way. On the other hand, if you quit your job and you don't make the $5 million over 10 years, and then you trade altcoins or whatever, you just probably lose all your money, and you'll be an unemployed brain surgeon that lost all your money. Because being a brain surgeon doesn't qualify you to trade altcoins. I mean, it might get you thrown in jail. Like a lot of smart guys, right? I mean, look at Voyager, Celsius, 3 Arrows, you know, Genesis, Terra, Luna, FTT, a lot of smart guys wanted to trade altcoins, and, you know, they made some money for a time, but they're juggling razor blades. So the promise of Bitcoin is you can do anything, and you can be wealthy and successful as long as the anything you do is profitable and you save your money in Bitcoin. Just understanding Bitcoin doesn't mean that you can sell more Bitcoin than Fidelity. See, you know, Jack Dorsey has 55 million people using Cash App selling Bitcoin, and Abigail Johnson has 35 million customers and $8 trillion of assets, and they sell Bitcoin. Just because you know Bitcoin doesn't mean you can outsell Fidelity or outsell Jack Dorsey. And at the end of the day, Apple may actually ship Bitcoin on the iPhone to 2 billion people to top Jack Dorsey. And, you know, Bank of America and JP Morgan may decide to try to top Fidelity. So you have to be aware that Bitcoin is an open, permissionless protocol. Anybody can do anything they want with Bitcoin. So if you're going to do something with Bitcoin, you should make sure that you're the best in the world at doing that thing. If you're the biggest bank in a country in Africa selling Bitcoin, and if you've got all the licenses and you know the market, you'll probably do well selling Bitcoin, and you should do that. But if you happen to be the most successful operator of restaurants in your town, and you understand Bitcoin, you're probably better off to operate the restaurants, take all your money, buy the Bitcoin. Right? And so my answer is figure out how you make the most amount of money year by year. Like MicroStrategy sells software, and we can make $75 million a year selling software. We compete against Microsoft. I can't beat Microsoft. You know, like they've got 80 million customers in Monopoly everywhere in the world. So I could, you know, like I can say, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to invest all my money trying to beat them? Probably not. What I can do is I can take all the money that I make selling my software and invest in Bitcoin. And so you know what? My stock can beat Microsoft. MicroStrategy stock is up like 140%, and Microsoft stock is only up 35%. So I can make more money than them, but I can't take away their customers, and I may not be able to take away all their market share because they have overwhelming power. And on the other hand, what can I do well? Well, I have a public operating company, and we can issue equity and debt and use cash flow to buy Bitcoin, and we can do that better than a lot of other companies. Microsoft won't do that. Facebook won't do that. So I'm going to do the things they can't do with Bitcoin. But I'm not going to try to outdo JP Morgan with what they do. I'm not going to try to outdo what Cash App can do. So I think that my advice to anybody is figure out what you can do. And if you are really good at brain surgery, or if you're a good musician, or if you're good at something else, if you can make money at it, right? The real acid test is, what will the world pay you to do something? If you can make money at that thing, enough to save money, then maximize that thing, and then make sure you save your money in Bitcoin. If you can make money doing something in Bitcoin, maybe you're a Bitcoin podcaster, BitcoinNews, if you're a Bitcoin bank, yeah, sure, but just make sure you're really good at it. And that means focus, right? I mean, there's a place for the most focused Bitcoin bank in Korea. But don't think that you're going to be the best Korean Bitcoin bank if you don't speak Korean and you're not in Korea, right? You probably won't be. So Bitcoin is, I think you could think of Bitcoin as like the ultimate banking franchise. Anybody can be their own bank. It doesn't mean you can be a profitable bank. Like, for example, you can be your own bank, or you can be the bank for your family of 13 people. Okay. Be your own bank for 13 people. You can be a bank for 1,300 people. You can be a bank for 13,000 people, or 13 million people. You can do stuff. Okay, will you be successful? Will people trust you? Do you really want to be a bank? That is a question. Will it be competitive? Will you be the best Bitcoin bank for all the rich families in New York City? Probably not. Probably JP Morgan will be the best Bitcoin bank for all the rich families in New York City because they've been doing it for 100 years and they have all the rich families in New York City as their clients. If you get there before them, maybe, but probably not. Like, there are some things where you can launch your own business and you can get to critical mass, but sometimes being the first with Bitcoin is not enough, and you'd be better off to take a different angle. Like, be a bit more creative. Maybe you're the first insurance, offering in that city with Bitcoin in it. So find that niche, find that market segment, and don't, you want to compete with Amazon, you're not going to be the first home delivery service that takes Bitcoin, and that's not going to take Amazon's market share, That won't do it. So you're going to have to find something more focused. But my advice is, if everybody early in their career, they should study the platforms that are big, right? And right now, AI is a big deal. Study the tools that are revolutionary. The revolutionary tools are AI platforms, the Twitter, new social media platforms, new networks, Lightning, study the platforms that let you make some world-shaking application. Then ask the question is, can you apply your talent to releasing something that levers that platform and make money doing it? And if so, then good, then make sure you convert that money to Bitcoin.
Thank you for your time, Michael. Really appreciate
Thanks for
it.
having me.